However, one simple change of image to this produces a major paradigm shift. In other words, we've added a different paradigm here in the horizontal syntagmatic chain. A Coca-Cola bottle centered between two halves of an orange, one in yellow, the other in blue. We're now in the world of pop art. It's like an Andy Warhol silkscreen. And advertising culture is also the visual language of photography and graphic design. It reconfigures the previous female and water iconic motifs in terms of thirst-quenching drinks. Coke adds life all of a sudden instead of it being about Greek myth and birth iconography. It's now about phallic erectness interceding into the world of women. It's like a penis and two testicles all of a sudden. But again, that could be just me reading in. It's a kind of postmodern pastiche of advertising language and conspicuous consumption, not the world of Renaissance high painting. As I say here, the object of desire is no longer obscure. Indeed, it's all the more obvious because it's readily available. As Warhol once put it, a Coke is Coke, and no amount of money can get you a better Coke than the one the bum on the corner is drinking. All the Cokes are the same, and all the Cokes are good. Liz Taylor knows it, the president knows it, the bum knows it, and you know it. We're in a whole different language and symbol world just through this one switch. In other words, the whole tenor of the narrative chain has been shifted by one simple paradigm shift, and the DreamWorks logic and memory logic has been completely reconfigured. And this is what goes on in all of these works in one way or another. And if you consider how Jean-Francois put these images together over many, many, many years, it's not that much different from the kind of composite memories that we all put together over years throughout the course of where we've lived, where we've traveled to and from, places we've revisited several times. Jean-Francois' case is very similar to mine. We both came here from Europe. We both have spent many times flying back to where we came from. But he no longer sees France, and I no longer see England divorced from our experience of living in the United States, and vice versa. I always say, yeah, it's easy for me to go back to England because when I'm within 5 minutes of landing at Heathrow, it's like I never left. But it isn't like that at all, because I bring so much baggage with me back from the US, just as even though I might renew myself in terms of being from England while I'm there and take that back to the US in turn, the composite quality of who I am and the memories I bring into play are always changing, and they're always building upon themselves. It's like when you go to the seaside on holiday and then go back to the city afterwards, you always take a bit of the city with you on a holiday, and you always bring a bit of the holiday back to you. And that's what these images are doing in their own different ways. The other thing that happens with this work is that it also, of course, gets reconfigured in many different ways depending on how the totalities are structured in the gallery. They work on a micro level by changing the horizontal and vertical relationships, but they also work on a macro level depending on whether they're configured like this, where you have this stagger effect, and they all seem to be pointing like an arrow in this direction, and you think, what's the significance of that? Or they could be in a circle, and you could think maybe in terms of, well, does the northernmost part of the circle mean something different than the southernmost, the easternmost, or the westernmost? In terms of someone like Jean-Francois, when he's back in France, the west is obviously going to conjure images of California. The south is probably going to conjure up the Mediterranean and summer holidays. He once told me that the east always conjures up dark mornings getting up for school before the sun has risen, when it's damn cold and you're going off to school in the dark, which is something you'll always remember your whole life, I think. I do. And it creates a kind of palimpsest of memories that are both highly structured on a certain level, but also lose their structure as you grow older and they start to get replaced by much more ambivalent memories. There's a major memory here for me. This image here is actually of me in my kitchen that Jean-Francois drew probably about 3-4 years ago. But he's redrawn it in such a way that I'm also sitting in Marcel Proust's kitchen. So it's tapping into the whole ethos of Proust's use of memory. I'm sitting in double form reading a book. Now, none of you would know this unless I told you, but I'm actually reading one of my own books that I wrote. So there's a certain folding in of my own creation of narrative into the narrative that's being depicted in this image. Most importantly for me right now, though, sitting next to the table is my golden retriever, Nikki, and this picture is very emotional for me because my dog has cancer right now and is undergoing treatment. And there's a possibility he will never actually be in this kitchen again. So this is a very, very resonant image for me and will remain resonant probably for the rest of my life, whereas a year ago it would have been less resonant because he wasn't sick at that point. Now, if I line these pictures up in alignment with this image, because this is one I'm in, the other images take on a similar resonance, but in different ways. This is an image of Jean-Francois' mother holding a leaf up to her face from a picture that he took of her. And Jean-Francois cannot help but see these speckled dots on the leaf also as cancer, just as I now cannot see them that way, anything other than that way myself. And the image progresses across some of these other images as well. I see these isolated circles like CAT scan images of my dog's body, which is images of slices across his chest and lungs, again with cancer spots. Or this as a giant visual instrument that might be used in medicine and investigation as well. None of you will read these in that way. You'll have your own interpretation. But again, all it takes is one turn of the handle and I get Nikki out of the scenario and replace it instead with trains in a station, and the whole deck of cards changes its meaning accordingly as a result. So in this sense then, all memories are both discrete and often very, very specific, but they're also composite, ambivalent, and muddied, and they're also endlessly reconstructible because of duration and because of time in terms of how they unfold in very, very different ways. I mean, for example, if my Nick recovers from his cancer and I get 5 more years of life out of him, I'll look back on that image in a much more fond way, which is inevitable. And I like to remain optimistic about that for obvious reasons. The other thing I think that's important, and you're getting the advantage of this more than I am right now, is how these works look as machines in long distance. You're also starting to see how they are structured in terms of common design motifs. You start to see the blank areas far more that stand out without necessarily having to align them all as blank areas. Here's one, so get all those to line up. That's a kind of contrived voluntary memory that I've done there just to make a point. But it's far more interesting just to let them fall at random in a scattered fashion to see how your eye gets directed by certain things and how you start to make sense of things accordingly. I don't know if any of you have read any novels by this Polish modernist writer, Witold Gombrowicz. But he wrote 3 key novels, Pornografia, Thirty-Duke, and Cosmos. And I think they're all collected in one volume. But Cosmos is this very interesting book about these characters who go through life, who have this tendency to generate meaning from the arrangement of things. And they can be walking through the woods, for example, and they'll see the way branches are aligned in one tree and how it kind of aligns with branches aligned in another tree and how a certain shape is formed, and they impose significance on it. And they get to the point where they can't stop doing this. Even the most banal chance relationship between things generates a desire in them to see significance everywhere. In other words, impose language on everything. And I think from a distance, if you're that way inclined, these works kind of encourage you to do that, whether it's through form or color, and so on and so forth. If you also notice that there's a tendency for people who've been in and out of the space to have left things lined up, which suggests that they have a kind of horizontal logic which requires them to leave things as they seemingly should be refound by someone else. They're not all out of alignment, which they could just as easily be. Again, that tells you far more about yourselves as spectators than it does about the inherent properties of these as machines. I mean, they're almost like computers. They have to have an algorithm built into them, which Jean-Francois has provided, but we don't necessarily have to follow it, but we do. Because we probably share the same relationship to memory that he does.